Hello and welcome to episode 32 of The Climate Skeptic. I'm your host, Laurie Wastel, an associate editor at the Daily Skeptic. Now, as concern about supposed climate Armageddon continues to wane, there are those who still want to claim that the climate alarmist predictions are set to come true. But are they right? Well, to discuss that this week, I'm very pleased to be joined once again by Ben Pyle, who is a journalist and Daily Skeptic regular. Welcome back, Ben.
Thanks for having me again, Laurie. Good to be back.
Very, very good to have you here, Ben. So, yes, let's begin with this piece that you've written in response to this column by the Telegraph's Ambrose Evans Pritchard, who you describe, I think, as the paper's long-standing solar power evangelist, and indeed one of the few conservatives still over there who believes himself to be a green zealot and wants his fellow conservatives to be one too. So what has he been writing this week, and how is he sort of trying, it seems, to maintain the idea that the climate alarmist predictions haven't gone wrong and the temperatures do continue to rise? And is that really right?
Well, I think it's probably wrong. What Ambrose Evans Pritchard has done is he's read what is essentially a blog post by James Hansen, who is often referred to as the godfather of climate alarmism. He gave testimony in 1988 to, I forget which branch of the US government, but that sort of set the ball rolling. That really put climate change on the agenda, and a very particular form of climate change alarmism too. But he's been mostly wrong in his predictions. He's overestimated sea level rise and global warming over the last 4 decades. Often even sort of putting some distance by doing so between himself and other, categorical alarmists, not people you would mistake for climate skeptics. People like people like Michael Mann, who was sort of infamously litigious against his critics, and has zero patience for anyone remotely related to climate skepticism at all. At the beginning of the year, what people tend to do is make predictions for what the rest of the year might have in store. And climate alarmists love a prediction. And so the climate alarmist community had have been having little discussions with each other about what kind of warming there's going to be for 2026 and possibly 2027. And so James Hansen downloaded some of his thoughts into a blog post and published them on his academic webpage. Ambrose Evans Pritchard has seen this and regarded this as a scientific prediction that there is going to be a temperature anomaly of 1.7 degrees centigrade in 2027. So what he says this means is that anyone who's at the moment feeling a bit comfortable about the fact that climate change is off the political agenda is going to have some kind of rude awakening over the next year or so, and that's going to bring a lot of people back into the green Tory fold, into the arms of John Gummer and Zach Goldsmith, if you like, and Claire Coutinho's contingent within the Conservative Party are going to be diminished by this news. But what I think especially strikes me about this is that the threshold that existed previously was 1.5 degrees. That's the UN limit. That's the target of the Paris Agreement to limit global warming to less than 1.5 degrees centigrade over the pre-industrial average. Now we passed that in quite a number of months over the last decade. So why this is a bit of a surprise to me is that we did recently have a global temperature anomaly for the whole year of 2024 of 1.5 degrees. And of course, 1.5 degrees is the target of the Paris Agreement. It's under this threshold that the Paris Agreement wants to keep us, right? So we passed this threshold in 2024, and yet the world kept on turning. And indeed, 2024, like many other years, saw an increase in agricultural productivity, agricultural production, all of the things that would categorize a climate crisis simply didn't occur. Pretty much we passed to 2024 as a planet without event. So the idea that, a couple of tenths of a degree more is going to suddenly open everyone's eyes and they're going to rejoin the blue greens is a little bit of a mystery, really, why anyone would suggest such a thing. That's not been the experience. And I think what I would say to someone like Ambrose Evans Pritchard is, well, look at why people are falling away from this now that there is a political schism in Britain and probably in Europe and definitely in international politics. There is a schism on this issue, and that's because the reality of high energy prices seems to be much more frightening and much more destructive than any degree of climate change that we might consider plausible, or even any of the consequences of climate change, which are plausible. So people are just going, well, high energy prices, climate policy is worse for us than climate change. And so this is beginning to change the political context everywhere, I think. And I think it's sad, really, that long-standing alarmists who've taken quite strong positions aren't able to reflect on that and to sort of incorporate that into their argument and to develop it. They're sort of still standing steadfast. I compare Ambrose Evans Pritchard to George Monbiot. I say he's something of a tribute act. And it does seem to be that form of intransigence is characteristic of environmentalists, whether they're blue environmentalists or red environmentalists or just greens.
Yes, quite. But of course, in the pages of the Telegraph rather than the Guardian, which is interesting. I did sort of want to drill down into some of what seems to me to be rather unscientific language here. I mean, so he puts it as, well, we'll get our first taste of a 1.7 degree C world. And as if this is sort of some discrete happening that is like clearly differentiated from what came before, as opposed to if we did see global temperatures for 1 year be like that, this wouldn't necessarily prove every other part of your argument with you. It wouldn't necessarily bring all of these other consequences that you're saying, like as you've just laid out there, agricultural yields might in fact go up. But there's this claim that as soon as you reach this one pretty arbitrary number, this sort of essentially vindicates the whole hypothesis. But that's really not how science proceeds. And you have to take one variable among very many others. So there's sort of a because I would argue that much of the evidence for what they're saying has always been so weak. There's a desire to sort of hit a given target and say, oh, well, look, everything we've said is true. And then you can't sort of naysay anything.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think it's unfortunate that we don't really get the opportunity to explore what these thresholds really mean. Because when you drill down and you try and find out what it means, you get a lot of flannel, and it's a truism essentially. You could choose any number you want. Yes, something that you're not sure the likelihood of happening is more likely to happen after a certain threshold, i.e., 1.5 or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 degrees warming than before it. So, and that's all that 1.5 degrees means. That's all that 2 degrees, which preceded it, meant. We know more about what will happen before 2 degrees than what will happen after 2 degrees. But that gets turned very quickly into a sort of there is a sort of causal event that takes place at 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees. That means the world is no longer safe. And that's just false. But that's the kind of science we have developed that has been developed or has developed for the last 20 or 30 years. Some might call it post-normal science, and some might call it the precautionary principle. But essentially, the more we sort of ask science to do questions of morality and politics and policy making and economics, because perhaps political decision makers don't really like taking responsibility for things, but also because sort of it seems like it's a more ideological or politics free way of doing policy. So it's attractive for those reasons. You get almost entrepreneurial institutions within academia and without it, setting up these sort of expert committees to try and inform that process. But and it sounds great. And I remember in the 1990s and the 2000s, the likes of Gordon Brown were talking about government of all the talents, and this is the best way to do politics. Science knows the best way to assemble, teams of experts to say what should happen, what policies should be implemented. But what science isn't very good at is interrogating the extent to which its institutions have been colonized by politics and ideology, right? And they really have been, and we can see that very clearly in institutions around climate change, because they're for them, it's an article of faith for many people when they go into this field of science that a greener world is a better world. It's not necessarily that they can articulate that in any scientific way. It's obviously a better world if there's less CO2 in it than otherwise. They're not asked to think about what the trade-offs are. And this ideology grows and grows. Now, you can actually do